say. So you withhold payment, but whereas before they might just give up on you because it just wouldn't be worth chasing, there's now a vast information network that can keep punishing you for that for the rest of your life. It'll be on a record somewhere, and the next time you apply for credit, or the next time you want to open an account with a phone company, that's held against you, or when you want a mortgage, it's held against you. So the power of the people who control the information networks to punish you for what they consider to be misbehavior is one of the things I find most offensive. But a lot of people have lost their credit ratings as a result, and and then their homes, and that is in America especially is a common enough story.
Yes, absolutely. And so I guess what you're saying as well then is that this move towards the cashless society is also incorporated into this the fear, so to speak, that you're describing here. That's also a big threat, so to speak, to our privacy, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And the question is also as well if there's a way to, and you alluded to this a little bit earlier or touched upon this, if there's a way to live within the grid but to remain more anonymous. I mean, how can we hide from CCTV cameras, for instance, by not being too, standing out too much, by having a ski mask overhead or something like that? You know what I mean?
Sure, and there's a whole bunch of tips. I think if you go on the Off-Grid website, you'll find a list of them somewhere. Ways to thwart Big Brother, I think it's called, which includes, well, with the CCTV cameras, wear a hat. I mean, hats have really gone out of fashion. If you look at pictures of crowds 50 years ago, everybody was wearing a hat. But of course, hats fall off when you run, and they're not part of the sort of active sportswear age we live in. But hoodies are. So for the fashionably inclined, wear a hoodie and keep your eyes, out of sight of the CCTV cameras. And for those older people who are worried about privacy, wear a hat with a nice wide brim, and then the CCTV cameras won't be able to identify you, because one of the few rules that the CCTV cameras have to follow is they have to be above 2 meters above the ground. That's just a health and safety regulation they have to follow. So wear a hat and they won't be able to detect your facial features. And then the other thing that's happening with the CCTV cameras is that all the traffic cameras are hooked into the National Police computer. And by the way, the CIA now has access to all that data. So if you think of that movie, The Bourne Identity, it's not fanciful to think that the CIA could be tracking Jason Bourne via CCTV traffic cameras in Britain. The British Home Secretary specifically gave permission for that very thing to happen in a little noticed order a couple of years ago. So when it comes to driving around, when your car registration number is on a computer, and that means that anytime you pass a traffic camera, the number is automatically recognized, and you are automatically being tracked from that moment on. So one solution that some people adopt is simply not to drive around in cities where most of these cameras exist. And if you do, then maybe rent a car or borrow a friend's car. There is a small way that you can deter the video cameras, especially at night. You can have an infrared light in the light bulb that shines onto your registration number, your car registration number, and that will completely confuse existing video camera technology.
Is that illegal, or is that?
It's not illegal, no.
Well,
because it's not something that's yet been made illegal.
That's a very good tip, Nick. And I'm also wondering a little bit about because you mentioned the corporate world, and then we have the government on top of that. But what about this public-private partnership that we see developing now as well, where we have private companies that are kind of under contract by government. For instance, we can mention the Axiom Corporation, like it's been described as one of the biggest companies that you've never heard of, and that are primarily involved in analyzing computer data, information technology, data mining, and so forth, which gather all of this data. It's a private company, but the governments can use that. Have you heard about Axiom, by the way?
Yeah, and also there's another company called Serco in Britain, in Europe, which handles a lot of functions that you would think governments would be in charge of, like everything from traffic lights to CCTV cameras. So what about them? Well, they should be more effectively regulated, and what they do with their information should be very transparent. And there should be very specific legislation to say what they cannot do with their information. You know, as to exactly how it has to be held, what level of security there has to be on it, what punishments they face if they lose any of the information, and in particular, what restrictions there are on mining that information.
Exactly, and you know, if we start to get into a little bit of the, I guess, the solutions of what can be done, or rather how to get off grid, you know, keeping yourself off the grid seems to become almost like a full-time job as well. In one sense, it's more and more difficult, so to speak, in that sense. And do you think that could be one of the purposes as well, that they slowly, how should I put it, get you so tired that you become acclimatized to the situation that you're in, that it becomes so difficult to remain anonymous within the system, so eventually you kind of accept it? Do you think that's could be the case here as well?
I think that for a lot of people, they're actually quite pleased to, you know, have the information network around them. I think for a lot of people it makes them feel safe, and I think that was one of the messages of George Orwell's book 1984, that it's only a minority of people who worry about these things. Obviously there's criminals who worry about it, but leaving criminals out of the equation for the moment, there's people who care about their freedom and their ability to be free-willed, independent citizens, and then there's people who are actually quite happy to be consumers, who just, you know, want to be left alone to consume and don't really care who's collecting any information about them until it's too late, you know.
Yeah.
And so we mustn't for a moment think that we're fighting on behalf of everybody. But for the minority of us who want our freedom and don't want to become a trapped consumer who's simply kind of servicing the corporate monolith, there are, you know, a very wide number of choices as to how we can live our life, and that includes, you know, being off-grid in the city. You can still be right in the middle of town and have, in some cases, you know, renewable energy, whether that's from solar panels or from a wood-burning stove, and you'll certainly have to reduce your energy consumption. And you can catch your own water from the rain, and, you know, this might sound kind of, you know, fanciful or Luddite, but it's not. I mean, the technology is now good enough that you can do it and live that way. And, you know, obviously it requires an upfront investment, but the result is that you're no longer dependent upon the energy company to provide your power, which, by the way, they might not always be able to do.
Well, exactly. Very good point, Nick. I was just going to ask you about that, because how can we, you know, we don't really have any guarantee that it always will be in place. And if we have potential, you know, changes going on in terms of either everything from sun activity pretty much up to flooding or change in weather patterns, these kinds of services can be knocked out as well, and we stand there, you know, not having any alternatives, so to speak. So to be, you know, independent, so to speak, from that, it's a very good idea, don't you say?
It's getting to be a better and better idea, and there's two things happening. One is, in Europe and in America, there's a realization that there's a huge investment needed in order to cater for the coming electricity demand. that we've got aging plants which are going to be taken out of service for one reason or another, and that we haven't invested early enough in their replacements. That's true in some countries, but not in others. It's not true in Germany. It is true in Britain. It's true in America. I don't know about Eastern Europe. And so that's the first thing, is that